The scent of saltwater filled the cabin as the private plane descended toward the crescent-shaped island below. Beside me, Lucy gazed out the window, her sapphire eyes sparkling in anticipation. Her excitement was almost contagious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was out of place on this trip. As the IT manager at our firm, I was more accustomed to crunching numbers behind a screen than rubbing elbows with the elite. Lucy, on the other hand, thrived in these settings. She had a magnetic charm, the kind of energy that could light up a room. It was part of why William Fellows, the client hosting this weekend retreat, had taken a liking to her. She was, after all, his point of contact at our firm. It didn't hurt that she looked like she had stepped out of a Scandinavian fashion catalogue, tall, blonde, effortlessly chic. The plane touched down smoothly, and as we disembarked, a warm breeze greeted us. William's staff escorted us to the main villa, a sprawling estate nestled among swaying palms. The group, a mix of firm executives and their partners, chattered excitedly. Lucy fit right in, laughing at William's jokes and complimenting his island paradise. I tried to ignore the way her eyes lingered on him a second too long. Lunch was served on the veranda overlooking the bay, a feast of grilled seafood, tropical fruits, and champagne. William played the role of gracious host perfectly, moving between conversations with practiced ease. When he reached our end of the table, he greeted Lucy with a familiarity that set my teeth on edge. "Lucy," he said, his voice smooth as the silk shirt he wore. "You've been a tremendous help these past few months. I hope this weekend gives you the break you deserve." "Thank you, William," she replied, her smile radiant. "This is incredible. You've really outdone yourself." He turned to me, offering a handshake. "Mark, isn't it? I've heard great things about you. I'm glad you could join us." I shook his hand, his grip firm but calculated. "Thanks for having us. The island is impressive." William chuckled. "It's a little slice of heaven. Please, make yourselves at home." For the rest of the afternoon, we lounged by the pool, snorkeled in the crystal-clear waters, and indulged in endless rounds of drinks. The atmosphere was light, but I couldn't shake the tension building in my chest. Something about William's demeanor, the way he carried himself, the way others seemed to orbit around him, felt predatory. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, we gathered for dinner. The conversation flowed easily, and laughter echoed into the night. Yet, I noticed how William's gaze often drifted toward Lucy, how she seemed to bask in his attention. It was late when we returned to our villa. Lucy was unusually quiet as she slipped out of her heels and poured herself a glass of wine. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her. "You seem to enjoy yourself," I said, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, swirling the wine in her glass. "It's a nice change of pace. William's been a great host." "Yeah, very attentive." Her eyes flicked to mine, a flash of irritation crossing her face. "Don't start, Mark. It's just work. You know that." I nodded, though her words did little to soothe my unease. "Of course." The next day was a blur of activities, kayaking, beach volleyball, and another lavish meal. William was everywhere, orchestrating the weekend with meticulous care. He and Lucy seemed to have an unspoken rhythm, their interactions seamless. By the time we gathered for cocktails in the evening, I was barely holding it together. Then came the invitation. William asked Lucy and me to join him in his office for a private discussion. The three of us sat in the opulent room, a security guard standing discreetly by the door. William poured himself a glass of scotch before taking a seat across from us. "I appreciate you both taking the time," he began, his tone measured. "I have a personal matter I'd like to discuss." Lucy shifted nervously beside me, while I leaned forward, waiting for him to continue. "Over the past few months," William said, his gaze fixed on me, "I've gotten to know Lucy quite well. She's an extraordinary woman, intelligent, charismatic, stunning. I tensed, my fists clenching at my sides. Get to the point. He smiled, unbothered by my tone. I'd like to propose something unconventional. I'd like to spend the rest of the weekend with Lucy, just the two of us. In return, I'm willing to compensate you generously, $100,000 transferred to your joint account immediately. The room fell silent. Lucy's face flushed, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. I stared at William, barely able to process what he had just said. You're joking, I said finally, though I knew he wasn't. Not at all, William replied smoothly. This is purely a business arrangement. No strings attached. I turned to Lucy, expecting outrage, but she avoided my gaze. The silence between us was deafening. You knew about this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question. Mark, it's not what you think, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't agree to anything. He just. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't insult me with excuses. William leaned back, sipping his scotch. Take some time to think it over. The offer stands. I shot to my feet, fury coursing through me. You can keep your money, William. My wife isn't for sale. Without waiting for a response, I stormed out, leaving Lucy and William behind. The night air hit me like a slap, but it did little to cool my anger. I needed to get off this island. Away from William. Away from Lucy. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. If William thought he could buy his way into my marriage, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Sleep was out of the question. I paced the balcony of our villa, the ocean's rhythmic crash a poor counterpoint to the storm raging in my chest. Lucy returned sometime after I'd left William's office, but I didn't acknowledge her. She hovered near the doorway, hesitant, her silence heavy. Mark, she finally said, her voice small. Don't, I barked, spinning to face her. Don't say a word. Her lips parted as if she had more to say, but she clamped them shut and retreated into the bedroom. I stayed outside until the first streaks of dawn painted the horizon, too restless to sit, let alone sleep. My mind churned through 1,000 scenarios, none of them ending well. By morning, I had made a decision. When Lucy woke, she found me sitting at the small desk by the window, laptop open. Her tentative "good morning" hung in the air, unanswered. I pretended to focus on the screen, but my ears were tuned to her every move, the shuffle of her feet, the faint clink of a glass as she poured water. Mark, she tried again, sitting across from me. I need to explain. Explain what? I snapped, my fingers still on the keyboard. Explain how you let our client proposition you. Or maybe why you didn't shut him down immediately. Her face fell, but I didn't stop. Or maybe you were flattered, I continued. Maybe you liked the attention. After all, he's rich, powerful, charming, everything I'm not, right? That's not fair, she said, her voice trembling. You don't understand. You're damn right I don't, I cut in, finally looking at her. Help me understand, Lucy. What part of this makes sense to you? The man wanted to buy you like you were some commodity, and you didn't even seem surprised. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I waited, daring her to deny it, to tell me I'd misunderstood. Instead, she wiped her cheeks and said, I didn't agree to anything, Mark. I swear. That's your defense? I laughed bitterly. That you didn't say yes. You didn't say no either, did you? Her silence was answer enough. I shut the laptop with a sharp click, the sound making her flinch. I'm leaving, I said, standing. You can stay here with your new admirer, or you can come home and try to salvage whatever's left of our marriage. Your call. She stared at me, wide-eyed. What are you talking about? You can't just leave. Watch me. The airport wasn't far, but it felt like an eternity as I rode the resort's private shuttle, my duffel bag at my feet. I didn't bother saying goodbye to anyone. The other guests could gossip all they wanted about the man who stormed out mid-retreat. I didn't care. My priority was getting as far from William Fellows and his twisted proposal as possible. But running away didn't mean I was done. As the plane lifted off, I pulled out my laptop and opened a VPN connection. William's Island might have been a private paradise, but even he couldn't escape the reach of technology. Over the years, I'd gained access to most of the firm's internal systems, not out of malice, but out of necessity. As head of IT, I needed to ensure everything ran smoothly. Today, that access would serve a different purpose. I started by scouring his corporate emails, searching for keywords: island, retreat, Lucy. It didn't take long to uncover a pattern. William had used these so-called retreats to lure other employees into compromising situations. He'd manipulated, coerced, and likely paid off countless individuals to keep his predatory behavior under wraps. But it wasn't just emails. Financial records told an equally damning story. Bank transfers to offshore accounts, suspicious expenses labeled as consultant fees, and more, all of it painted a picture of a man who operated without fear of consequences. The deeper I dug, the angrier I became. William's arrogance was staggering, but his carelessness was even more shocking. He'd left a trail wide enough for anyone to follow, assuming no one would dare challenge him. Well, I dared. Back home, I set up in my office and continued my work. Days passed in a blur of data analysis and digital reconnaissance. I barely slept, barely ate. Lucy called a few times, but I let them go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not yet. By the end of the week, I had enough to ruin William. Not just ruin him, obliterate him. I drafted an anonymous email, attaching the files I'd collected. It was a digital bomb, set to detonate across his professional and personal life. Recipients included every board member at his company, major clients, and, of course, his wife. Hitting send felt like justice. The fallout was immediate. News of William's misconduct spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with speculation, reporters swarmed his corporate offices, and his wife filed for divorce within days. By the end of the month, he'd resigned in disgrace, his empire crumbling around him. Lucy came home the day after the story broke. I heard the front door open and close, the tentative sound of her footsteps. She found me in the kitchen, sipping coffee, looking over headlines about William's downfall. "Mark," she said softly. "We need to talk." I looked up, my face impassive. "Do we?" "Yes," she insisted, sitting across from me. "I know I hurt you. I know I made mistakes. But I didn't cheat on you, Mark. I never would." Her words hung between us, heavy with unspoken truths. "I don't know if I can believe you," I admitted. "You let him think you were considering it. You didn't shut him down, Lucy. You let it go too far." "I was scared," she confessed. "He's our biggest client. I didn't know how to handle it. But I would never have gone through with it. You have to believe me." "Do I?" I asked, my voice cold. "Because right now, all I see is someone who prioritized her career over her marriage." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't falter. She had to feel the weight of her actions, just as I had. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I stared at her, my anger warring with the love I still felt. Could I forgive her? Could we rebuild what William's greed and her silence had shattered? "I don't know," I said finally. "But you've got a lot to prove." Lucy nodded, her expression one of determination and regret. It was a start, but the road ahead was anything but certain. The days that followed Lucy's return were a delicate balancing act. Our conversations were guarded, her every move deliberate. She tiptoed around me, careful not to ignite my still simmering anger. Trust was a fragile thing, and she'd fractured ours in ways I wasn't sure could be mended. At first, I threw myself into my work, burying the chaos of my personal life beneath a mountain of technical challenges and corporate emergencies. But distractions could only keep the storm at bay for so long. Every evening, as I sat at the dining table or retreated to my office, the silence between Lucy and me was deafening. One evening, as she cleared the dishes, she turned to me, a determined glint in her eye. "Mark, we can't keep living like this," she said. Her voice was calm but resolute. "We need to talk. Really talk." I put down the glass of water I was holding and leaned back in my chair. "Fine," I said. "Talk." She sat across from me, clasping her hands on the table. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I need you to understand that I didn't agree to anything. I panicked. I froze. And I didn't know how to handle it." "You didn't know how to handle it?" I repeated, incredulous. "Lucy, he wanted to spend the weekend with you, for money." "How is—" "No, not the immediate response." Her face flushed with shame. I was afraid of what it would mean for my career. For us. He's our biggest client, Mark. If I'd pushed back too hard, what would that have done to the firm? To your job? To mine? I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "And what about our marriage? Was that less important than your career?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "No, Mark. It wasn't. It never was. I made a mistake, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I need you to know that I love you. I've always loved you." Her words hung in the air, the weight of them pressing against my chest. I wanted to believe her, but the betrayal was still too fresh, too raw. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally. "You let it go too far, Lucy. You made me doubt everything about us." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know. But I'm not giving up on us, Mark. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust." Lucy threw herself into rebuilding our relationship. She started coming home early from work, cooking elaborate dinners, and planning weekend outings for the two of us. She even suggested couples therapy, a step I hadn't expected from someone as fiercely independent as her. At first, I resisted. The idea of sitting in a room with a stranger and baring my soul felt like an admission of defeat. But as the weeks passed, I realized that avoidance wasn't the solution. If there was any hope of salvaging what we had, I needed to meet her halfway. Our first session was awkward, to say the least. The therapist, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Myers, guided us through introductions and set the ground rules. Lucy spoke first, her voice trembling as she recounted her side of the story. She admitted her faults, her fears, and her regrets. When it was my turn, the anger I tried to suppress boiled to the surface. I told Dr. Myers about William's proposition, about Lucy's hesitation to reject it, and about the toll it had taken on me. "I felt betrayed," I said, my voice shaking. "I still do. She should have shut it down immediately. Instead, she hesitated. What am I supposed to think?" Dr. Myers nodded, her expression sympathetic. "It's understandable to feel that way, Mark. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and it's clear that this situation shook that foundation. But the fact that you're both here tells me that there's a desire to rebuild. That's a good starting point. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a step forward." Over the next few weeks, therapy became a lifeline. We confronted our issues, dug into the cracks in our marriage, and began to piece together the fragments of trust that had been shattered. Meanwhile, the fallout from William's downfall continued to ripple through the firm. His resignation had sent shockwaves through the industry, and clients were fleeing in droves. The board scrambled to contain the damage, but it was clear that the company's reputation was irreparably tarnished. Lucy bore the brunt of the scrutiny. As one of William's key contacts, she was subjected to endless questions and sideways glances. Rumors swirled about her involvement, some employees even suggesting she'd been complicit in his schemes. It was brutal to watch, but she faced it with unyielding strength. She met every accusation head-on, refusing to let the gossip break her. And in those moments, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, the resilient, determined, unshakable force that had drawn me to her all those years ago. One evening, as she recounted another grueling day at the office, I reached across the table and took her hand. She looked up, surprised. "I see how hard you're fighting," I said. "For your career. For us. And I appreciate it." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reminded me of the good times we'd shared. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That means more than you know." It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of anger that threatened to undo our progress. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to see a path forward. It wasn't the same as before, too much had happened for that, but it was something new, something stronger. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough. The sun was setting on an unseasonably warm autumn evening, casting a golden glow over the horizon. Lucy and I sat on the porch swing, sipping wine and enjoying a rare moment of peace. The therapy sessions had done their job, or so it seemed. We were beginning to find a rhythm again, a fragile, tentative harmony that felt like the early days of our relationship. "I was thinking we could get away for a while," she said, breaking the silence. "Maybe take a trip up to the mountains, just the two of us." I turned to her, the corners of my mouth curling into a small smile. "That sounds nice. We could use a break." Her hand found mine, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that we could rebuild. That the cracks in our foundation could be filled. But deep down, a small, persistent voice reminded me that wounds like ours didn't heal so easily. The next morning started like any other. I kissed Lucy goodbye as she left for work, promising to call her later about the trip. She smiled, her eyes lighting up in a way that felt almost like the old Lucy, before the island, before the betrayal. I watched her car disappear down the driveway and turned back to my coffee, the steam rising in delicate spirals. Around noon, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. "Mark Harrison?" a gruff voice asked. "Yes," I replied, my stomach tightening. "Who's this?" "This is Officer Daniels with the Metro Police Department. I'm calling about your wife, Lucy." The world tilted beneath me as I gripped the edge of the counter. "What happened? Is she okay?" There was a pause, a hesitation that stretched too long. "Sir, I'm sorry to inform you that your wife was involved in a car accident this morning. She didn't make it." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words didn't register, their meaning bouncing off the walls of my mind without sinking in. What do you mean?" "There must be some mistake. I just saw her this morning." "I'm very sorry for your loss," the officer said gently. "The accident occurred on the interstate. Another driver ran a red light and struck her vehicle. She was killed on impact." The days that followed were a blur. I moved through them like a ghost, my body present but my mind trapped in an endless loop of disbelief. Friends and family came and went, offering condolences I could barely process. The house felt impossibly quiet without her laughter, her footsteps, her presence. I found myself sitting in her office one evening, surrounded by the remnants of her life. Photos of us from happier times, notes scribbled in her handwriting, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. On her desk, I noticed a small envelope with my name written on it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated the night before she died. "Mark. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to say this out loud, so I'm writing it here. I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything we've been through. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment. That weekend on the island, I was scared. I didn't know how to handle what William was asking, and I froze. But I should have shut it down immediately. I should have stood up for us. For you. And I didn't. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Mark. You've given me love, laughter, and a life I never thought I deserved. If there's any part of you that can forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my days proving that I'm worthy of it. But if you can't, I'll understand. I just want you to know that no matter what, I love you. Always. Lucy. I held the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. All the anger, all the bitterness, dissolved in that moment, leaving behind only a hollow ache. She was gone, and with her went the chance to say all the things I'd left unsaid. To tell her that I'd forgiven her. That I loved her. That despite everything, I was ready to start over. The mountains she'd dreamed of visiting were shrouded in fog that week, their peaks hidden from view. I made the trip alone, carrying her letter in my pocket. At the top of the trail, I scattered her ashes, watching as the wind carried them into the endless sky. And for the first time since that call, I allowed myself to cry, not for the betrayal, not for the broken trust, but for the love we'd lost and the future we'd never have. The sun set behind the mountains, casting the world in shades of gold and crimson, and I whispered the words I should have said long ago. I love you, Lucy. Always.